Welcome to Forestry Now, where we explore the forces impacting profitable and sustainable management of commercial forests and natural woodlands. I'm Dermot McNally. Today's guest is Alan McCabe. Alan is the manager at Glaslough Tyholland Group Water Scheme in North Co Monaghan. In this interview, we briefly discuss how Alan manages his own forest. Then we turn to discuss Alan's role as County Monaghan representative on the IFA Forestry Committee, and we talk about where the IFA are working for forest owners in Ireland. Finally, we discuss Alan's work and involvement with the River Blackwater Catchment Trust. The Trust have one project that aims to remove self-seeded Sitka spruce conifers off the heather boglands of Sliabh Beagh, and we'll find out how they do this and why it matters. As always, find links and contact details in the show notes below and enjoy the conversation. Okay, so Alan, thanks a million for joining me.
Glad to join.
Alan, firstly, can you start off by telling me where your own forest is and what you've planted?
Yeah, I have a couple of forests here in Monaghan. One of them was a family farm. It was just too far away to, economically farm. So about 15, 16 years ago, we decided to plant it. Planted it in mainly Sitka spruce, the cash crop, the normal cash crop. But we also put in about a hectare of ash. We put in a little bit of oak, and we put a little bit of alder in on the wet spots as well. Plus, at one area that was at risk to frost, so we put in some Norway spruce as well.
Very good. And how's it all performing?
Yeah, the Sitka spruce done amazingly well. It's a really good crop. There was a little bit of larch in it. We did remove it at the time because it was competing with the Sitka spruce. And, it doesn't grow that straight or that well, so we took it out. So it was sort of a natural thinning process. So it was, the ash did get ash dieback. We removed the whole crop under the rust scheme. There was a few rows in it I thought wasn't affected by the ash dieback, but when the guys were cutting it down, they said, okay, let's cut a few of these just for example. And when we cut them, there was ash dieback in them as well. So the complete crop was affected by it. So we cut it all back and we replanted it with birch, improved birch.
Brilliant, okay. And what about your oak then? Have you done anything with it, or how's it performed in the ground?
The oak's done well, so it has. We've done a little bit of shaping on it. We're going to do a little light thin this year on it and more shaping on it. But it performed well. There was no problems with the oak. The alder was in some wet ground. To be honest with you, didn't perform that well. It dried the ground out. In hindsight, probably the site could have taken some spruce or some Norway spruce. But that's the decision we took at the time.
Yeah, that's hindsight, yeah.
Overall happy, it was a good decision. The premiums, good to get them tax-free. We had no problems with, animals or deer or anything like that. Except for the ash, we had no instance of any disease or pathogens or anything like that affecting any of the crop. At the minute now, what we're looking at is a forest roadway for thinning and for extraction in the future. So we're hopefully going to maybe start that in the new year. We're just going through the process of planning it and scoping it out and doing the application for the grant. So that'll be the next step on both of them. I've gone off the idea of thinning. I know a lot of the experts out there, and Teagasc especially, would say, listen, thin if your site is medium or even lower risk to wind blow to thin it. But with the recent storms, especially Storm Owen there recently, I've sort of taken the decision not to thin. I'd rather take a lower risk of wind blow than a higher, tree density or fine crop. I'll take that risk of a lower pay, on the fine felling. That's the decision we made, just not to thin now.
Yeah. No, totally understood. And just where the road is going in, Alan, will you be able to get the road in without upsetting the stability of the Sitka, or are you coming into the broadleaf area?
Yeah, well, the broadleaf we planted, the ash we planted at the time, we put that on the edge of the Sitka spruce. So any of the entrance into the forestry have that soft or ash planting. So the ash has been taken out now, so there's a natural buffer, to area to take the roadway. So, and we designed the roadway, the plantation. We were thinking ahead of where the roadway would be, or where the bellmouth will be there for turn it into the plantation. So we'd all that sort of pre-planned. We kept the setbacks from the roads and things like that, which sort of facilitates easy access into the site.
Very good, very good. And have you enough hectarage there to make the road, or will you have to put much of your own money to it because the road grant is paid by the hectare?
Yeah, we think we might have to add a little bit to it, and for maybe the turning circle as well, maybe they might have to add a little bit in it, but it should more or less cover the cost of it, so it should.
Very good. How did you physically thin that, Alan? Was that a manual job, or was it just that they were dying off?
No, they were actually performing very well. They were outgrowing the spruce. So we just, chainsaw operator went in and just cut every one of them. We left a few in here and there just to see how they do. But, our reasoning for taking them out was confirmed. You could see they were growing faster than the sickest spruce. They were outperforming the sickest spruce around it. So maybe 8 or 10 trees around each one of them was being affected by that single tree. So it was a good operation to take them out, and even consulting with, Forest Service afterwards, they said, listen, that was a good idea. If you were putting them in again, larching again, plant a little group of them together, a corner of them together, but not, spread out across through a spruce plantation.
Getcha.
It makes sense. And, the stocking density was still there. Probably something, if you've good to marginal land, the stocking density that we plant at today is probably too high. That if the stocking density was slightly lower, we probably wouldn't need to thin as much or thin at all, possibly. So taking out these larch was like an early thinning process as well. So the fact that I don't have to go back and thin at the moment was probably, that 10% of larch that came out at that stage, naturally let the forest thin itself.
Very good. Okay, well, maybe we'll move on to the IFA Forestry Committee then. You're the County Monaghan representative on that committee. Maybe you could tell me what's involved and what the IFA offer their forest owning members.
Yeah, I was adopted onto that committee probably springtime this year. The committee, there's a representative from every county in Ireland on it. And then we have the normal committee chairperson and vice chairperson, and there's a secretary as well. We meet minimum 4 times per year, face to face, usually at Dublin, at Farm Office in Dublin. And then we organise maybe 2 or 3 site visits per year, just going out to see various farms, sawmills, whatever exhibitions are on at the time. So it's been a very good experience on my behalf so far. We have a very good subsection or cross-section of people with different levels of experience and, exposure to forestry. At the meetings, the meetings are good, they're informative, everybody can get their opinions across. The decision-making is, equal, everyone has an equal vote. I have to say our chairman is very, very active. He's sitting on a lot of steering groups and, the various government sectors and departments would invite the IFA as a major stakeholder and a major representation of farm-owned forestry out there to a lot of their meetings. And we get the ear of the minister as well. We'd be able to, invite the various ministers into our meetings and, really challenge them and ask them the hard questions and give them, our view. So, it's a good forum, a good committee, a good way for, local farmers to contact me or the other reps in the other counties and bring, their issues, problems to a national level and get it aired at a national level. And one thing the committee does in the background, we have a very good secretary there that works with IFA, but if people have, individual issues with the department, and I'm sure Dermot, you've come across it like I have. There's you ring the department, you mightn't get through. You talk to somebody, you may not get the decision you think you should be getting. But when we refer these issues to IFA, they seem to have a hotline into the department, and in a lot of cases can get a decision that was maybe a hard or wrong decision, maybe turned around, or maybe some compromise there. So a lot of work goes on in the background. There's a lot of meetings. Maybe the chair and the vice chair take. That maybe the whole committee can't attend, but we feel that they're representing us extremely well, and the feedback, and we're getting decisions, say on the windblow, and replanting, and on the rust, the ash dieback. There's some compromise coming there, basically from things that we've lobbied for and asked for.
Yeah. So just on that, I mean, there's been a couple of meetings this year. What have been the key issues that the Forestry Committee is working on behalf of forest owners, the general issues now?
Well, of course, this year, windblow is the big one. There's a lot of work gone into the windblow. We've sat on the department committee meetings, the windblow committee that was set up. And we were extremely vocal on that. We weren't happy with how things were progressing. And we've taken on the sawmills and the various contractors as well, and the haulage companies. And we've told them that, what we see happening out there is not good at the moment. There's vulnerable people. They've been thrown into this situation. They never planned for windblow. This is their first time maybe, to cut their timber. They're success, they're at risk of, people taking advantage of them. So we've been talking to all the different actors out there and just saying, listen, we need to be as fair as possible to people, and giving them advice, how to go about getting quotations, and, not just taking the first quotation you get, and send them out information as well. Like, what is the price of timber today? That's not advertised anywhere. It's not on any website. It's not in any newspaper. But we're gathering that information, compiling it, and able to send that out to people and say, listen, this is the price per cubic metre that you should be getting. And if you're getting less than that, go somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. And what mechanism have you for getting that price, Alan? Is it that your existing customers will feed back their latest information?
It's a combination of things. Our secretary phones around the sawmills, and some of them give their prices, some of them don't give their prices, possibly. We have the consultants out there, the forestry consultants. They be getting this information daily because they be interacting with their clients. Also, people that's gone through the process, they would, just tell us what they got or what they didn't get at the time or hope to get at the time. So we take all of this and, try and get a rough average of where the market is at the moment, and feed that back out. But it's useful information. It's really important that people know what the market is paying. Like, we have examples of people maybe getting 20% below the market price, and when they had that information and go back to the sawmill and say, listen, you've given 20% more last week, and sawmill, okay, we'll give you 20% more. It just from a phone call. Like, on a big site, 20% is a lot of money. It's the difference between maybe breaking even or not, as the case may be.
Yeah, very good. Alan, I've heard anecdotally that ESB are trying to widen certain corridors through certain forests because of the fear of windblow in the future and wires coming down. So in the one sense, we're all sympathetic to anyone who'd be affected by a loss of power due to trees coming down in a forest. How can a landowner protect themselves if the ESB wants to come into an existing forest? Is there a mechanism there if additional trees are cut that hadn't been agreed to?
We actually had ESB at our last committee meeting, and they gave us a run through on the current state of, Storm Owen, and after that, and lessons learned. And I think, as we know, there's some possibly legislation on the way through that would give ESB access to your lands, whether you like it or not. So it's a process we're engaging with ESB and the department, that whatever mechanism they come up with, that there's full consultation with the landowner and agreement with the landowner. If there's easement needed there, or if there is trees that need to be removed, that the farmer is fully consulted, that there's an agreement, that there is a payment for loss of timber. And we've brought up things like, during Storm Owen, they went in and cut up trees for power lines, but they cut the trees into bits, instead of cutting them into sawlog that could be commercially sold. And they put their hands up and said, listen, yeah, we know that happened, but there was a panic at the time, and, we had to get the power back up. But we are in discussions with them that, in cases like that, the farmer, the landowner is fully compensated at commercial rates. And if the easement or the needs to be agreed, that there is a policy with IFA and the ESB on payments and payment rates for forestry corridors. And that's being actually looked at the moment again. It needs to be revised, and some of the rates need to be updated on it. Now, as you said there, power's critical, to everybody and everything, so we it's something we just can't say no to, but at the same time, we have to get the best package and the best deal for landowners, farmers, and we will be negotiating that and working that out over the problem at the time is, like, some forests were planted with the incorrect setback, and that is a big problem where lines were taken down, where the proper setback was put in, not an issue. But on saying that, some setbacks, the trees are growing, they're growing out, they're growing up, and there's a case now that there's some maintenance needs to be done. You may need to trim back that line of trees, not cut them back, but trim them back. And it was something like, the ESB were saying it depends on the agreement you had at the time. Some of the agreements the farmers signed said that you must maintain that corridor. Other farmers signed agreements that said, no, the ESB will maintain that corridor. So I think we all need to go back and look at what kind of agreement we signed at the time. But it's something we said to the ESB, like, there's no way any individual or farmer or any organisation even should be let near power lines and do maintenance. It has to be done. It's a dangerous, task to take on without the proper trained staff and capabilities. So we'll be saying to the ESB that if there's maintenance to be done along these lines, that they must do it and pay for it. And at the same time, with farmer landowner agreement, that before the work starts, they say, listen, this is what we're going to do, and this is the setback we're going to be doing it to. And we also told them, like, that first row of trees or 2 row of trees along these corridors, if you take those trees out, that leaves the rest of the forest very susceptible to a wind blow. So, they took that on board as well, and that, that we need to, think these actions out before we move into sites. And but as I said, there's work to do with them on this, and we need to engage with them. And they agreed that at that committee meeting, the people in this room are experts on forestry. Now, the ESB are experts on power, but they're not experts in forestry. So they have hired a couple of forestry experts, and that they're building up their forestry team, and they're going to have a team of facilitators, to go out and engage with landowners and farmers. So they are putting resources into that side of the organisation.
And finally, just on that IFA committee, is there any talk about objections to licences and the structure that the department have for assessing objections for licences that go to appeal?
Yeah, well, listen, we're always on the licence issue. We're always in discussion. In a lot of cases, we're taking it on an individual case-by-case basis. but at policy level as well, that we would be engaging with the minister. And, the minister has actually come out this week and said that licensing is no longer an issue. It's being handled in normal timeframes now, that there's no delays on it. But if there's any cases or individual issues, we will take those on. We're going to have to wait a little bit of time now and just see how good his statement is and see how well it's working. As you know, there's serial objectors out there, and they're using a lot of the department's time and resources, so we're just going to have to see if the process is fit for purpose. And if it's not, we will be going back to the minister and say, listen, we need to strengthen the approach or do something different here.
We'll get back to the conversation with Alan McCabe in a second, but if you're in the market for forestry, go to forestsales.ie, where you'll find forests for sale across the country and all the information you need to make a decision. That's forestsales.ie. Now back to the interview with Alan. Well, let's move on to the River Blackwater Catchment Trust. My understanding is that the trust aims to protect the Blackwater and its associated habitats, but maybe you could explain the catchment and where the Blackwater ends up.
Yeah, the catchment starts in Tyrone and County Monaghan. Sliabh Beagh would be the source of 5 of the rivers into the Blackwater, and then roughly up around 5 Mile Town would be the other source of the Blackwater. So they flow down towards Armagh and through Armagh, and then they flow out through Lough Neagh. So the Blackwater be one of probably the second biggest catchments that flows into Lough Neagh. And from a eutrophication and sedimentation point of view, we probably be the biggest input for nutrients into Lough Neagh. So we'd be probably one of the biggest problem catchments for the problems they're seeing in Lough Neagh. Okay.
Where's that eutrophication coming from, or that sediment coming from?
Farming would be one of the biggest or bigger inputs into eutrophication. But then, we have wastewater treatment plants, we have, urban centres, we have individual septic tanks, we have industry. Forestry is possibly part of the problem as well, but it would be, I would count it as a smaller part or the smallest part of it. But if you combine all these inputs, risks together, at the moment, the eutrophication levels in the Blackwater are too high, especially phosphorus. That's the killer at the minute. The phosphorus levels are too high for the ecosystems in Lough Neagh to handle.
Can we step back 1 second and I'll get you to explain just the size of Sliabh Beagh itself, this area that we're talking about, the counties that falls on, and then if the habitat is in good condition, what type of species are up there?
Yes, so Sliabh Beagh, it's an upland site. I think the highest point in it is about 380 metres, which isn't high for a mountain. It's part of Fermanagh, Tyrone and Monaghan. The peatland makes up roughly 3,000 hectares. The whole site, which would include a lot of forestry area, is probably 10,000 hectares. So it would run from Lisnaskea right up to, say, Athnaclye. That would be the scope of the site. 2/3 of the peatlands in Northern Ireland, 1/3 in County Monaghan. So it's a cross-border site, which brings certain challenges to the site because, you're dealing with different authorities, different bodies, different objectives for each site. So the site, it's mainly sphagnum mosses and heathers on the site. It's a blanket bog. And there is actually a couple of areas of raised bog on it, on the lower edges of it, which is quite unique. From a forestry point of view, I think the peatland, the 3,000 hectares of peatland, is probably nearly 100% circled with forestry, commercial forestry. And that's the case in a lot of, uplands in Ireland at the minute. Species on it, we're lucky to have hen harrier is one of the species that make it an SPA. And we have red grouse in it. We have merlin on it as well. golden plover, snipe. So it's an important site, for species, and we're running out of sites that, support these species, and the numbers of these species on site are, they're at their limit at the moment, for sustainability. It's a interesting ecosystem. It's an important ecosystem. Sliabh Beagh, about 100 years ago, or maybe a little more, it wasn't in forestry. It was, marginal land. It was peatland. It was heather. It was sphagnum mosses. And I think in 1900s, around that stage, there was a decision made, to plant land. And the state, the Forest Service at the time, decided, this marginal land, say around Sliabh Beagh, was the quality and type of land that should be planted. So the problem isn't now on Sliabh Beagh is we have it, all the periphery of it is planted and it's all Sitka spruce. And there is a policy within, say, Kilshire, who would be one of the landowners, when that Sitka spruce is removed, that we replant it with native species. But the trees up there are serving a purpose now. They're holding back a lot of the water and rainfall that would fall in Sliabh Beagh. So it's something we need to think about and be very careful that if we start to clear fell a lot of this Sitka spruce, that could cause a lot of flooding, and the rainfall that it would attenuate and hold up there to suddenly come down through the streams and rivers much, much faster than it currently does. And we can see, like in the local villages here in Emmyvale and Glaslough, like on these big storm events, we're nearly getting to the 50 or 100-year storm events, the water levels, where homes and businesses would be flooded and affected. So it's something, we're sort of awakening to, that, we're going to have to come up with a really smart, intuitive, dynamic policy for how we manage the forestry on a mountain like Sliabh Beagh, that we just can't clear fell it in one go. If we replant it, what species do we replant it with? If there's area of peat that just we shouldn't plant at all, just let it restore itself. But that's a long process. And as I said, where does all of this rainfall, which is being attenuated up there, where does that go instead? Do we need to create maybe, flood zones or something like that? Do we need to create maybe lots of leaky dams, that will let to do what the forest is doing, but just do it with a physical dam instead or something like that? So it's interesting. It's something I think it's really, it's a new phenomenon, that's it's only coming now after, one or two cycles of forestry in a peatland or in a mountainous area like this. So should we have a policy, for the mountain rather than each site, when they're clear felled and how often they're clear felled and what they're replanted with? Even the pine needles from Sitka spruce, they're like a blanket on the ground underneath the trees, and they soak up a lot of moisture. If we could measure that amount of moisture they soak up. But when they soak it up, they slowly release it into the ground.
Yeah.
And even that, we call it a pine needle blanket. If that disappears on a site, how does that change the hydrology of the site? This ground had to be drained to be planted. So there is drains in it. So will these drains, which are now closed in with sphagnum moss and with other, plants, will they open up again and sort of the flow of water suddenly become fast out of the site? So a lot of things there to consider that, maybe we didn't think about at the time when they were being planted, these cultures down the line. So,
okay, so maybe then that's a good place to move into the River Blackwater Catchment Trust, the project they're involved in removing self-seeded conifers that are coming on to the bogland that you mentioned. What's that challenge and how is it happening?
So basically, the commercial conifer plantations around the mountain, the seed that they produce, and sometimes when a tree's under stress, especially on a peatland, they create or grow more seeds. And these seeds are blown by maybe the wind or taken out by birds and are dropped all across the peatland. And some of them grow, some of them, I can see as a pioneer species. The first seed that drops in, the first little tree that grows, maybe doesn't grow so well, but to create a little miniature habitat where the next seed, when it comes along, grows much better. And you can see after time, more and more trees growing, and each one growing even better than the last tree that grew. So this happens in a cycle. It's never ending. These trees change the hydrology of the peatland. They're not native. They're an invasive species up there. They're not supposed to be there. There should be no trees on the mountain. Not even native trees really should be up there. So they change hydrology. Other species start to grow beside them. They dry out the peatland. They change the structure of the peat. The other thing to do as well, the ground nesting birds, because they think a predator could nest in these self-seeding conifers, they won't nest close to them. So if you've got thousands of these trees spread out all over the mountain, the hen harriers, the grouse, they'll say, I'm not going to nest here because it's not safe. So you're starting to isolate hundreds of hectares because of these single trees all over the place. So what we do is we map them and we come up with a plan. We get some funding, it's grant money to do all this. And NPWS have been extremely good in giving us grants to do this. We hire a contractor because, this chainsaw work is dangerous work. It's not something volunteers can do the small trees, pull the small trees for sure. But some of these trees, they could be maybe 30, 40 foot tall, maybe 16, 18, 24 inches wide. They're big stuff. Now, at the moment, we've got most of that removed, all the big stuff removed. And we find, sites that we've cleared 5-6 years ago, we have to go back to them now. The reseedings are maybe 2-3 foot already on them. Now they're simple to remove at this stage, but it still takes people time, money to remove them. Now, we've looked into various studies and policies, when we do cut these trees, what to do with them. And we found the best thing to do is just leave them there, just let them decompose. The damage you do to the peat and the habitat taking them out would be much more than leaving them there. And we've noticed already, even some of the bigger trees, when they've decomposed, and we were afraid, that might nutrify the ground around it and cause, maybe another round of, invasives to grow, but it didn't. They're just dying back, and it's making no difference to the habitat around them. So as I said, it's a constant cycle. We move from area to area to area every year. It's never ending, never will end. So, but it makes a big difference to the site. When you actually see the before and after, you can see, how invasive they were and what a difference they were making to the sites. And we can already see species moving in to sites that we cleared, maybe a couple of years ago, that hen harriers are back using some of these areas that they weren't using before. Or we can see grouse or snipe moving into these sites again and expanding, their nesting areas, which is exactly what we want and want to see, which is brilliant.
Yeah. Is Sitka the only self-seeding invasive there, or are you facing the same challenge with cherry laurel or rhododendron or anything like that?
There'd be a bit of Scots pine. We see a bit of Scots pine, which is an upland native tree. There'd be a few Scots pine moving in, but on Sliabh Beagh up on the peatland, there shouldn't be any Scots pine. They weren't there for the last hundreds of years. Now, they might have been there thousands of years ago, but they shouldn't be there. We'd see a few mountain ash growing up on it, which you'd say again that's where they should be, but not up on the peatland. They shouldn't be there. And unfortunately, we're starting to see the odd bit of rhododendron here and there showing up. Lucky enough, the site hasn't much of it. And, at the moment, it's easy enough to control. There's a bit of laurel in places. And basically, I think this was people taking their cuttings from home and dumping it on the site. And, a cutting of laurel, if it gets any contact with soil at all, off it goes.
Let me pause the conversation for a second to ask you this. Could your business benefit from increased profile in the forestry sector? If so, maybe you should advertise on Ireland's only dedicated forestry podcast with new episodes coming out every 2 weeks. So get in touch with Forestry now to see how we can make it work for you. Back to the chat with Alan. So your guys, your contractors are going out sometimes predominantly by hand on quads. Is it across the bog to isolate these trees, cut them down? Or how are they physically travelling? Because I can imagine the ground isn't that passable underfoot in parts of the bog.
Yeah, we try and keep the quad usage down to the minimum. And I mean the minimum. If there's an existing track into the bog, maybe where some of the people were cutting peat or something like that, we use them. But be honest with you, it's mostly on foot. It's hard work. And it's a tough day. When the guys do a day out there, it's tough work. And it's dangerous because the ground isn't level as well, so health and safety and, our method statements and all that kind of thing, we have to be very, very careful with it.
Yeah.
But it's the only way to do it. There's unfortunately, there's no machine or there's no tool that will do it for you, so, and, you have to be on the ground level to see, what's there and where it is. And, we're looking at using drones to survey these invasive species. And that technology is getting really good. It can pick out, each different species as well and, the densities of it and map it for you as well. But that's something new we're experimenting with at the minute. And when we build up these, data sets from the drone videos, we'll be able to know where and when we need to target areas, and be able to estimate how long it will take to clear out an area again, and how big of a team of chainsaw operators we need, or maybe even volunteers we need to clear out that area, and how long it'll take.
Very good. Just to come back to the natives that are self-seeding, are they only self-seeding because the conditions have been altered so much from its natural state, Alan?
That's exactly it. In its natural state, there shouldn't be any trees growing on the peat. It shouldn't support any trees. The bog should be wet enough. And this is something that's happened over decades as well. For peat extraction, there's been artificial drains dug all over the mountain. And the water table, the water levels have changed. They're not, water should be roughly 20, 30 centimetres below the ground level. That's where the water table should be, but it's much lower than that. So native trees and, foreign invasive trees can get to halt and grow in that habitat now where they shouldn't have. Now, going back thousands of years ago, and there is some areas, some maybe ravines or, maybe some rocky areas that, there should be some natives there, but the vast majority of it shouldn't support any trees. We can see as well, whin bushes where there's been pathways excavated out right down to clay level. And if you walk up that, it's all whin bushes each side of it now because the peat isn't there anymore. So they've found clay to seed in and put the roots into. And suddenly you've got a species there that shouldn't be growing up there, but we've created the habitat for them by creating a walkway. And the problem is now that other species will move in beside them because they're creating a habitat for the other species. So to every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Unfortunately, these reactions may not be good,
Has the peat extraction stopped up there, and will that be part of the project to start blocking some of them drains and bring the water table back up?
Yeah, we're surveying the areas at the moment, where we can, easily block some of these drains and, where there isn't peat extraction. We have a Peace Plus project starting, this year, which lasts for 4 years. But the process of actually restoring the bog will last for decades. You don't get quick fixes or quick returns. And you're going to make a few mistakes too. Some of the things you're going to try may not work. You may need to double up on some actions or change some actions or maybe just give up on some actions. And So it's going to be a long process, and it's going to be a learning process.
No, brilliant. Okay. So, Alan, just before we finish, is there anything that we as forest owners need to be working on in the years to come?
Yeah, I think it's from a private forest owner's point of view, it's really important. I see forest groups and individuals coming together, and organisations like IFA, whatever, that we upskill everybody. If there's things that we can maybe share resources on, maybe equipment or resources, whatever it is, that we can do that, and knowledge sharing as well, that, if I make a mistake, about it, Dermot, and you won't make the same mistake, and vice versa, So I think there's a lot we can do there as individuals, as organisations, and as an industry, and we need to make sure that nobody has a bad experience with forestry, that, it's good commercially, it's good for your well-being as well. Like, you get a positive experience from forestry, from growing the trees, watching them grow, to clear felling it, replanting it, see how your timber's being used, see how it's good for, the ecology, it's good for maybe the water quality, it's good for animals, it's good for livestock, shelter, things like that. But all the benefits from forestry that, that we can enjoy them.
Yeah, very good. Okay, Alan, thanks for taking the time to talk to me today. Much appreciated.
Welcome, Dermot. Thanks.
If you're interested in the work that the IFA Forestry Committee are doing, or the River Blackwater Catchment Trust, look below in the show notes for relevant links. That's it for this podcast. Feel free to comment or subscribe for more episodes.